Hello everyone and welcome to our second MegaCon Mini event. Really glad that you could all join us today following our postponement from last week. I do wonder a little bit if anyone wishes they'd been listening to us rather than watching the football last weekend, but let's not focus on that too much. We've got two fantastic speakers with us today talking about different elements of online mega games. A little bit later on, we're going to be hearing from Joe Morris of the British Civil Service Wargaming Network, who will be sharing some of his perspective designing Discord bots for the games they've run. But first up, we are going to have Kurt Larue of Splintered Realities. So Kurt has run the hugely successful Den of Wolves online quite a few times over the pandemic, and today he's going to be sharing some of the factors that he thinks are key in online mega game success. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We will be taking questions at the end of Kurt's talk before we move on to Joe's talk, but do feel free to post those into the pub channel at any time during the talk. Also, as I did mention, today's talks are being recorded. So can I get a virtual round of applause for Kurt, please?
Thank you very much, Becky. I am honored that you all asked me to come in and speak at this. And I'm not really sure. Well, I'll try to say some things that I haven't said before publicly, but maybe not. And then we'll see where the questioning takes this conversation to. But yeah, I actually came into Den of Wolves and online megagaming and megagaming period pretty much in an interesting manner. I'd always been interested in it, but then found myself with a lot of extra time, like lots of people, as the pandemic started. And the story of how I got into it is memorialized on another conversation, actually, another podcast. But I basically dumped into the deep end of the pool with running Den of Wolves online. I was able to build off of some of the work that Johan and Gothenburg had done previously with Den of Wolves online as a good foundation. But jumping in and running it online really goes to my first main point of the success online. And even when you're running a mega game in person, honestly, a lot of this applies in person too, I think. You gotta have yourself a good group of people helping you facilitate the game and coordinate the game and planning the game ahead of time. And after some fits and starts, I was lucky enough to have a lot of really solid volunteers to help with that. And without them, the game would have been a huge disaster. And actually, the game probably wouldn't have even happened. I don't know if I've said this piece before, but there was one point in the pre-planning that the first time I ran Den of Wolves that I was, if things hadn't changed direction, I was probably an hour away from canceling the game, about 3 weeks out. But because of the group of people that I was able to contact and rally, we were able to pull off a pretty effective game. But organized chaos is really what I would actually call it as opposed to game. And I think any mega game that's true for, but in particular with Den of Wolves, by design, from a player's perspective, it's supposed to be overwhelming and organized chaos, which from a facilitator's endpoint, the people running the game, makes things really, really challenging. Because you want to at least feel like you've got some a control over the direction of the game. But as the game progresses, it can be a challenge to keep your thumb on what's going on across the virtual ring. In person, you at least can see the scope of the game and what's going on and where people are engaging, where people aren't engaging, where people might, where you've got players just sitting there looking bored, scrolling through their phone. Online, that's really, really hard to do, which is one of the reasons why we've always gone very heavy on the number of facilitators that we've had on, so that we could try to keep a close pulse on both player game or player engagement and also the overall direction of the game and what the high points were and what different hooks were being thrown out there by the players, that we could make sure we are responding to, or other players are given the opportunity to respond to, and then really give some of those things a chance to flourish. which is tough, right? Because anyone that's looked at Den of Wolves or run a Den of Wolves, probably the toughest part of Den of Wolves is keeping the science ship, the Endeavor, keeping it and that team engaged and ensuring they feel like they're having an impact on the game while also not completely derailing the game with some of the things they do. As if you get a really creative group in the Endeavor, that can get pretty crazy and lead to some very interesting outcomes. But if you're not paying attention to it from a facilitator standpoint, you can be caught on your back feet when all of a sudden something they're doing starts to blow up. Which really goes to the other big thing of running a mega game and pre-planning, and then also during the game is contingency planning. A lot of the conversations we had even in game was, okay, so if this thing these players are talking about doing or actually doing, if this grabs hold, or if this plot hook that we drop to try to put pressure on the players, or give them a reason to be paranoid, if that takes hold, what might that look like, and what can we have in our back pocket to be ready to respond? And on the flip side, if it doesn't, if the game starts getting boring, how are we going to respond to that? And a lot of times it's okay. Well, unless things change between now and the beginning of the next turn, we're going to be doing a wolf attack because things are getting a little boring. We need to step up the pressure on the fleet. The fleet's getting a little, they're feeling a little too comfortable. So let's throw some more at them, and things like that. And without going into a lot of details, spoiling things for people who've not played the game, there's a lot of different pressure points that you can be thinking about. And so, but contingency wise, that also goes back to pregame. What happens if we have somebody from the facilitator team have something in the real world come up at the last minute where they need to drop out? What's the backup plan? What happens if we have some players not show up day of game? How do we get a hold of them to verify they're not able to play? And what's the cutoff time when we fill them in again? And then the first time we ran Den of Wolves online, the Friday before we ran it, or a little over a week before we ran it, was when Discord had that major outage and was down for like 90 minutes on late Friday afternoon, or depending on your time zone, early Saturday morning, I think it would have been, over in your side of the pond. And we actually were in the middle of our final tech meeting when that outage happened, and we were doing it in Discord. And when we finally came back online and got back together, the question we were asking each other is, okay, what happens if this happens in the middle of the game? How do we, is there a way we can manage for this, and can we have a backup plan? And after about 10 minutes of conversation, we were like, yeah, if Discord craps out on us, we're SOL, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do. So we're not even going to think about it anymore and move on. Which is important too, to have realistic expectations and know what to worry about. And for anyone who does project management for a living, this all may sound very familiar because it's the same thing. That's what we're really doing here with a game, whether in person or online, is you're doing some mini project management. Okay, so that's some of the fiddly bits. But now, player engagement, like I talked about before, is tough to measure online. And one of the things we looked at very carefully going before into the game is, how can we pull out and the game mechanics, how can we automate that as much as possible, to and build as much of an immersive experience as possible for players to keep them focused in the game and in the role playing. And there's lots of different ways of looking at the mechanic versus role play balance in a mega game. and there's no right or wrong way to look at it as long as the players are having an enjoyable experience. The games I like to run, though, I want the mechanic to serve as a pressure point for the role playing and for the players' interaction. Um, and I think the Den of Wolves, as designed, does a pretty good job of having mechanics that inform the role play, and really no mechanics that don't affect the role play or don't add pressure to the role playing. But online, we wanted to pull that mechanic out of the view as much as possible. And both of our tech gentlemen did a really good job. Both Harry and Dave did a good job of helping build a system um, that automated a lot of fiddly bits, so the players didn't feel like when they're sitting at their computer like they were playing a video game. Which obviously, when you're playing a game online, is a really big concern. Are you just playing a video game, or are you just doing something in a spreadsheet or something that just feels like you're at work, or you're sitting at your video game console? How can you make that stuff as invisible as possible, to get out of the way and let the players actually interact with each other and do the role playing? Yeah. So I could keep rambling, but this is an interesting format here. I feel like I'm rambling into the void right now. I certainly can talk more on any of these subjects, but I think this might be a good point to pause, and I've not been paying attention to any questions that come in. So, Becky, if there's any questions that have come in, do you think are pertinent to go now? Let's go that direction, I think.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for all of that, Kurt. Some really, really interesting insights there. We have got a couple of questions in the pub. If you've got any more questions, feel free to put them in. I've got one to kick off. So, what do you think will be the role in the megagaming community for online games after physical games are back in full force? Do you think they'll remain popular?
I certainly hope they do. Because to me, one of the biggest things that the pandemic has done for us, and I think this is a very big positive that's going to come out of the craptastic last 18 months we as a planet have had, and honestly, a lot of the planet's still going to have for the next 18 months probably. But online has really shrunk the mega game community. The Mega Game Assembly, Mega Game Coalition, Mega Game Makers. I mean, we've never seen the interaction that we've had between the different groups across, in the United States and the United Kingdom, and then elsewhere. We've never seen this level of interaction before, and I think it's really improved the games that we've had. And like the last Den of Wolves that we ran at MegaCon, we had people running the game on the facilitator team from 3 different continents, which I thought was amazing. And just the conversations that the people from the different continents and the entirely different cultural backgrounds brought to the game really helped inform the game. But getting back to your question a little bit more, I think it's going to bring mega gaming to people who are less apt to be able to get to them. Just a lot of countries, you're 6 hours from a major city. And you're lucky if there's a group there doing that, and the groups are pretty small. So now we can draw from 7 billion people to play the games. And which, by the way, in the Den of Wolves, I think we've had somebody playing in every single game from every single continent except Antarctica, which I think is amazing in terms of diversity and shrinking the planet. But then also some of the things I'm excited to do, especially with some of the technology that's been built out. And I know experiments have been done in the past to dubious success, I think, from what I understand. But it'd be interesting to see, can a hybrid game be done? Again, now that we've built out more technology and we understand how to do this more, is there room for a hybrid game or more wider scale mega games? I don't know. And I hope I answered the question there by rambling on for 3 years.
Yeah, I think you did, and I definitely like the fact that we haven't had someone from every single continent, so we've still got, you know, like we've still got targets. Like we'll get Antarctica involved in metagaming, I think, in the near future.
Well, and I gotta believe McMurdo Station. There's people down there that if they don't know about making game, if they knew about it, they would love to do it. I mean, think about it. You're down there researching in the middle of the winter, even the middle of the summer down there. I mean,
Yeah,
let's do it. I mean,
without a doubt, without a doubt.
yeah.
Brilliant. So we've got a question from Chris about what you said about the first Den of Wolves. Were you on the cusp of cancelling the first run of Den of Wolves because you didn't have enough players, or another reason?
So no, it had nothing to do with players. Even though we never got a full player slate, but you know that was partially because of the venue we were running it through, and at that point I wasn't very plugged into the community. But when I said, really quick nutshell, I said I'm going to do this thing, and then without having talked to anybody. I had the license, but that was it. And then I reached out and put together a group of 10 or so people to do it. And turns out about half of those people that said yes, they would help put it all together, really weren't committed to doing it. So as we got in closer, and thankfully for this, several of them said, you know what, I can't now for various reasons. Some of it was because they didn't realize what the commitment was. Some of them just had their life change. So I had lost most of my control team, about half of the facilitator team. And then I put out a call on a couple of the Mega Game Facebook groups and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Anybody want to step in?" And several people stepped in, and we were able to put the facilitator team back together, and then we did the sprint for 3 weeks. And I think I want to say we ran the game with 35 people. I think 35 players, maybe not that many. I don't remember. That was only a year ago.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's so key to have people from the community who can support these sort of games, especially when you're getting sort of a new area launch. Yeah. So yeah, that rings very, very familiar.
Yeah, and oh man, that was a dark night for me, and I'm glad we pulled through. Which also goes to the other thing. Now, I won't announce a mega game until I have the control team or the facilitator team all assembled. I just won't announce until I've got a solid facilitator team. I'm not going to announce it.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb, I think. So we've got a question from Mr. Megagame himself. How important is pulling mechanics out of view of players to you?
It's extremely important. It's extremely important. Now, I'm not saying mega games or there's mechanics don't have a use in mega games. They do. It sort of depends on the style of mega game too, and how you're running it. And so I hope what I'm about to say doesn't generate hate mail. But I am now firmly of the opinion that the distance between a LARP and a mega game is really spelling. Now I know people may debate there are some differences, but earlier this spring I did a mega game or LARP online with the group out of the UK, just to see how they were doing things, and there were no mechanics, but because of the way they applied pressure to the game, I felt like there were mechanics, and I felt like I had lots of agency and was having impact. Which is really what a mega game's trying to do. But now I think the reason for mechanics in a mega game traditionally are because you want to do it with two facilitators or three facilitators. You want the players applying pressure to themselves. Which the way we've been running these things online with, 3-to-1 ratio of players to facilitators, yeah, that might not be as necessary. and we can discuss that one later.
I cannot imagine writing a mega game. I mean, I know there are mega games with that few control, Den of Wars being one of them, but I've had 20 odd control at every single mega game that I've done in person. So
yeah, but so actually, the one last thing I want to add to the actual question: any element that exists in the game needs to be there to apply pressure to the players. If it's not applying pressure to the players, then it shouldn't be there. And that's whether it's a story element, a piece of their background, or a mechanic element, or another player. If it's not applying pressure to the game and ratcheting up the pressure on the players, it's got no business being there.
So connected to that, Chris has actually asked, how many facilitators would you recommend for Den of Wolves Online versus the normal 3 for in-person games? So you said a much higher ratio.
Yeah, so we have run with, including myself, 11 or 12. Now, that actually is one more than you. Well, actually, it's 2 more than what I consider you actually need. But going back to contingencies, I actually think online it's good to have a couple extra facilitators as redundancy in case somebody loses internet connection or whatever. And then there's, like we have one person dedicated to the battle map. And the person dedicated to the battle map really only has something to do for 10, maybe 15% of the game. But every single game, that person has been invaluable to back up, particularly like when things start going crazy on the Aegis, especially with the Aegis brig. You then literally can put a facilitator down there. Okay, you go down and you sit on the brig. You handle the brig so that the Aegis facilitator then can manage the rest of the ship. But yeah, 10 to 12.
Yeah, and do you find that it's that means it's more challenging to staff mega games, or have you generally found it quite easy to find that number of control for your games online?
Well, outside of the first one, we've turned people away every time.
Brilliant. That's what you want, really, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And the one thing that I need to get better at is facilitator interviewing and figuring out the right people for that there. But let's face it, it's the same with the games. If we're have the right network and reaching out in the right audiences, we've got a subset of 7 billion people that are interested in this.
I really want to hear your thoughts about interviewing facilitators at some point, but I think we should probably move on with questions, but that sounds a very interesting topic.
I don't have any right now, but I need them. So I'd be interesting just having a fireside chat just to brainstorm and think about that.
That sounds really good. We'll pick it up in the designers lounge probably after this.
There you go.
Cool. So Ed has asked, one of the big weaknesses of online communication in general, not just in mega games, is managing bigger groups. What can we do to help work around that?
Well, so Ed, if I have that one figured out, I'm not sharing it because I am now a billionaire. That's the big challenge, right? There certainly are some very good I would say Discord or Teams alternatives out there, similar to Gather.town, which I know has been pretty popular in the community of lately. But none of them are perfect. It's there's no good way to do it, and I think the ultimate answer is to design that into your game. Make that communication a part of your game, which is part of the reason why Den of Wolves works so well online, because you want communication to break down in Den of Wolves. That's part of the point. That's one of the pressure points. You need it to be a challenge, but it's getting the players to understand that. And then on the flip side of that, though, is designing your technology with the lowest common denominator in mind. who is the player that's going to have the worst internet connection that you're going to care about, because you can't care about everybody. You can't care about on somebody on a 56 kilowatt modem, evidently, obviously. But figure out what your floor is, and then design your technology to work for that person, not the people with the gigabit internet. And I am a big proponent of banning video in Megagames. It just eats up way too much bandwidth for those low end people. But bottom line, Ed, design for the communication medium you're going to use.
That's a really good point. I think. So I think we've only got time for one more question. So I'm gonna go with Matt's question, which is, how can we meld the enhancements from online play into flesh games or physical games?
I have 10 seconds for that?
Yeah, around that. Take a minute.
It depends on the game. Like Den of Wolves, there's been conversation that the tech that we built for online Den of Wolves, that we've been using for that, would work very well to run tech in person. But then again, that's not the question. The game needs to be designed from the ground up, where the setting and the scenario make sense to do both. And that's where it's got to be designed done from the ground up, with the distributed nature and the technology involved to make the distributed nature a part of the storyline. If it's not integral to the storyline and bolted on, I think your odds are pretty high that it's going to fail. But again, that's a much bigger conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a good sort of initial thought on it, though. And there are a couple more questions in the pub. Maybe after the talks are over, you will want to pick up on those. But thank you so much, Kurt, for all of your brilliant ideas and thoughts. Hopefully, some people who have been listening to this who are thinking about running a game online will have a few more ideas about how they can go about doing that now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure to be here. I was honored to be asked, and hopefully this brought some value to at least one person. And I look forward to hearing the next half.
Great. So yeah, with that, next up we have got Joe Morris. So Joe works in the British Civil Service and is part of their wargaming network. They ran a geopolitical game earlier in the pandemic, and Joe was key in creating some fun and innovative Discord bots for this, which he's going to tell you a little bit more about, hopefully to inspire some future designs. So take it away, Joe.
Hello, thank you very much, and thanks for that very interesting talk that we just listened to. I'll have to go and check that game out. Sounds very interesting. Essentially, as has just been explained, I'm from the British Civil Service, and I'm part of their wargaming network, which started last autumn. And I was very pleased to hear about the network and joined it immediately, and applied for the games design co-lead role, and was very pleased to get it, which basically opened up a whole world of endeavour that I hadn't previously known existed, really, of this online wargaming world. So I'll just share my screen to explain what I've been up to. Okay, here we go. Everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So essentially the story behind how I got here really is that I joined the network. In the first committee meeting, we were basically told that there were various roles that we could apply for. One of those was involved in designing the games, which was really something I had to leap into immediately, despite probably not having really done anything sort of war game related for quite some years. It was something I was very interested in when I was younger, and then kind of drifted away from it, not out of sort of deliberate intent, but just the way life goes. And then I was like, actually, you know what? I've really got to go for this, because it's been like a lifelong dream, really, to be involved in designing games. And someone came to the network with an existing idea for a game, and I was quite happy to go along with that and sort of see how that would pan out. And one of their first requests, the kind of brief that got me involved in trying to write bots for war games, was that they wanted a function that would allow players to kind of spy on each other in Discord. Or at this point, we hadn't even chosen a platform for it. I'd never even been on Discord. I hadn't, to be honest with you, heard of Discord. This was all quite a rapid learning curve for me. And the simple brief was, can we design a function whereby players can communicate with each other, but you can also potentially activate a sort of espionage function against other players and get some of their messages, intercept the messages as they go. And I thought, this is a chance for me, as someone who's on the digital data and technology scheme of the civil service fast stream, so more the sort of tech side, to maybe use some of my knowledge, because some of the other games designers were very knowledgeable about international relations and geopolitics. And while that's an area of great interest to me, it's not, I don't necessarily have as much credibility on paper as some of these guys. So I thought this is a chance for me to really show what I'm made of, really. So I said, yeah, I'll find out how to do it. So I looked into how Discord works and the fact that you can program Python bots for it, as well as with other languages, and it opens up like a huge array of functions you can potentially use to enhance games. And yeah, I was very excited about what we could do with it, really. So I went back to them, said, yeah, we can do something like that, I think. Here's a very brief version of me, anyway, which I gather people weren't probably desperate to spend a huge amount of time on, but just to give the background for me, we've already been through the fact that I'm on the DDAT scheme, and that I'm a co-lead for the network, but also basically in terms of my longer background, I've always been really interested in solving problems logically and with programming, and sort of taking the scientific approach to things. And ever since I was a kid, I kind of always wanted to come up with my own rules for games like Escape from Atlantis and Risk and things, and do my own versions of them. So this is kind of a natural progression for me in a way. So bots are essentially, for those that aren't particularly aware of that side of things, essentially they're just a program that you can use to interface with existing applications like Discord. And it lets you use Python to control aspects of their functionality. And you can kind of build on the existing functionality of apps that are already out there, rather than having to build up your own things from scratch, essentially. And for me, it was all about what can we do to automate tasks to make a war game run better, not like replacing the human element, because I feel that that's a really important part of it, but just those sort of tasks where computers are really good at sort of doing rapid calculations and doing lots of routine tasks rapidly, essentially. So I'll just really quickly show you about how you set up a Discord bot. I won't expect you to follow the details, but just to give you a flavor of it. And if people are interested in doing their own, then I'll be very happy to, I'll give you my details afterwards, and I'll be very happy to have further chats about that, and maybe run a workshop or just a one-to-one chat, or put together more sort of documentation about it. But just very quickly, essentially you set up a Discord developer account. If you've already got a Discord account, that's just a few clicks. And then in the Discord on the Discord website, once you've got an account, you can go to new application, you can set up an application, and that's how you create your bots. Here you can see all the different ones I've done. And once you've done one, once you've created one, you have to authorize it. and get something called a token, which you put in your Python program that then basically authorizes that program to access that bot, essentially. So that's how the two things sort of connect, the Python program and the Discord side of things. So you kind of go in here, you tell the developer account what permissions you want the bot to have. Obviously, if these things are more public for general sort of distribution to the wider public, then you'd probably have it slightly less intrusive and with less permissions, so it can't just go around attacking other people's Discord servers. And once you've set all that up, you can move on to creating the Python program. You can also do this in other formats such as JavaScript as well. I like Python just because it's such a sort of standard for programming generally, and it's so flexible in that sense. You can pretty much do anything with it. It's the sky's the limit really with Python. And it's also very easy to use and beautifully designed really for user friendliness. So you install your Python Discord library, and also I installed something called Pandas, which is another library that lets you kind of use spreadsheets and things like that in part of your program. So I used like Excel spreadsheets to store all the data for these bots, so that you can just go into Excel and change the parameters without having to kind of change them in the program, and it'll automatically use those when you run it. And I use this development environment called Visual Studio Code, which is a free development environment for Python. So here you can see all my code for the different bots. There's quite a few different ones that I've got running at the moment, and I have like a master program that you have to run them all. Because the thing about these bots at the moment is they're all running from my computer, so I have to actually run them. They're not kind of running in the cloud, which would mean that you can just leave them on in the background, which is a kind of disadvantage that I'd like to basically change in future iterations of this and run them from the cloud so that they can be running permanently and they're less reliant on my computer. And then once you've got all that going, essentially you just run the Python program and it'll automatically load the bots into Discord. So if I set this running, for example, I'm hoping you can all see, you'll see all of this. But it's all working. Anyway, while I'm working out how to get that going, I'll explain about the espionage bot that I made. So this was the original brief that got me down this whole rabbit hole, was really trying to get this bot that would automatically copy people's messages into other channels. So the bot would pull in a bunch of Excel data which would contain the IDs for all the different channels in the Discord server, and allow it to access them. I'd set up espionage and diplomatic channels for each country, and roles, as I'm sure you're probably mostly familiar with if you use Discord, where teams could only see their own channels. And then the way the bot works is essentially every time a message comes in, it looks at it, it says, it waits for the message comes in. Is anyone spying on this channel? If so, copy a message to their channel and update the data. Every player would have different numbers of turns that would be preset, that they would be allowed to spy on other countries with. That would all be preset. So, for example, if we look into the data, it's all set here as you can see here in Excel that we've got for each country in this initial game, which was basically simulating a rising tensions in the South China Sea, and it would have relevant players like China and the US, Russia, and it would give, this data would give each country a different number of turns, essentially, with which it could activate espionage against enemies. So that's how that would work. And okay, so here we can see, I've got my example server here, so I don't know if you see that, hopefully. So for example, to activate, for China to activate espionage against the US, it would put USA in its channel. And here we say USA secure communication successfully compromised. Stand by if this targets next 5 messages. So each country has its kind of preset number of messages that it pulls in from the spreadsheet. And now when the USA sends something in its diplomatic channel, like to Russia, for example, then China will see it. So I'm just going to say, hello. And there we go. And they've intercepted it in their channel. And it will update the number of turns they've got, and so forth. So that's kind of how that works. As I say, if anyone's interested, I can give a much more detailed explanation of that. But the sort of other bot that I looked at was a way of crowdsourcing decision making, like a poll that allows people to vote on different percentages. Essentially, this was a feature that I'd seen someone do more by hand in a game that I played about a crisis in the EU, where we were asked to vote on the percentage outcomes of whether something would be successful. And then they would kind of roll a virtual dice to see if it happened based on that average percentage. And I thought this is a perfect opportunity to leverage the power of bots to do this kind of automatically, really, I suppose. So, for example, so yeah, I made another polling bot that kind of takes a vote and then spits out whether it happened or not at the end. So I'll give you an example of that. So I put in $poll, then a question, like a statement, like, will this happen? And then gives you percentages, A to J, everyone gets a vote, everyone gets 1 vote. It hides your votes so that there's less groupthink, hopefully. And then after 20 seconds, it kind of tells you, it basically rolls a random number, relates that to the average percentage, and then, so here we go, the average percentage was seen to be 95%, result of the random generator was 32, so that's less than that. So the bot says that the action was successful. And we've tried this out a few times, and it's a helpful feature. People find it interesting. It has some disadvantages. You kind of have to not treat it as gospel and sort of interpret the results with a sort of human take on it, really. The facilitators have to decide how that result is interpreted, because we've run games where it keeps spitting out quite unexpected results, because obviously random numbers can come up with unexpected results given enough time, and people weren't happy that something they felt was likely to happen didn't. So I think there's kind of room for using that in quite a nuanced way, really. But it's been an interesting tool to throw into the mix. And I think there's room for different ways of using this basic idea. Because you've got the power of a computer behind you, you can potentially have much more interesting statistical kind of readouts of it, using regression and much more sort of advanced models than the simple average, which I've done here. And also, we've worked out it works a lot better when you've got multiple teams, because if you just got 2, then that is a lot less. You're less likely to avoid the bias of one team going for essentially what they want and one team going for the other, even if you ask people to be unbiased. So that's the polling bot, which is another one that's been quite useful. And on top of that, I've come up with a timer that you can use, simple sort of device, but quite helpful. So you can just put in timer 2, and it'll give you a 2-minute timer, quite helpful. And also I've been looking into how you can automatically tally up resources and then try and interface that with the Miro API as well. So looking beyond the Discord API. An API, for those that don't know, is basically a way that you can interface with an application using a program to kind of command it to do things automatically, essentially. So there's also ways to do that with Miro. Like Miro has its own whole API that you can see here, which has got quite extensive documentation. It's not ideal because, as with all of these APIs, they're not necessarily designed for what we're trying to do with them. So you're always trying to work around the way these things were actually designed for different purposes. But essentially, I made a bot that can update resources, and then, for example, here I can do turn. Well, let me show you the map. An example map here. You can see I've got the turn number and the date, and like various resource points down the side, and you can make it automatically update all of that each turn. Like I do turn here, you can see that should have worked, but here we go. So it's gone on to another turn. You can see the turn number is updated, the date has updated, and all these resource points down the side have updated on the map as well. So it's just quite a nice way of keeping the two linked, the Discord and the map. Just more ways to try and save time. I can see I'm running out of time for my talk as well, so I'm just going to try and wrap up quickly, which is essentially yeah, so what next? I've got lots of ideas with where I'd like to take all this. The sky's the limit in a way. I'd like to host the bots remotely in the cloud so they can always be running. I'd like to use Google Docs APIs like Google Sheets for the data instead of Excel, so you can just have it remotely updatable by like anyone who's involved in the game. There's something called Leaflet for the maps potentially, which is a way of having really custom maps rather than using Miro. You can use almost like a sort of Google Maps type interface and potentially have that running in the game. So you can put counters down and have people doing various stuff with that. That's pretty good in terms of potential. And eventually I'd like to almost code a platform really specifically very much tailored for online wargaming, but that's obviously a little bit further in the future, but that's my sort of end game with this. And also I'm interested in, are there ways to use this technology for in-person events, which has already been, mooted, that sort of side of things after the previous talk. So I'm really interested. I want us to sort of use the best of both worlds really, and not throw away everything we've learned over the last 18 months. We could potentially make in-person events, give them more functionality, and also I'm sure remote events will continue to happen and hybrid events. So yeah, if anyone's interested in learning more, I'm sure you can get my details. I'd love to collaborate with anyone who is interested in sort of bringing these sides of it together really. So that's about it, I think. I don't know if I've overrun, sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for that, Joe. One of my favourite things about these sort of talks is when you hear something and it just starts sparking ideas for a game that you're designing, or maybe not even designing yet, and it just gets your brain going, which your espionage app definitely did. So I can see we've got a few questions in the pub already. If you've got any more, then go ahead and pop them in, and we've got a few minutes for questions. But I just wanted to start by asking, how technical does someone need to be in order to be able to design one of these? I'm guessing that they already need to know how to use a programming language like Python or something similar.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of technicality involved, but I hadn't used Python for a few years myself, or even done any programming for a while. I had got a bit of a history in that area, but not like, only quite superficial really. You need, realistically probably need a certain amount of an aptitude for that sort of logical thinking, but I think anyone, to be honest with you, I think with a bit of guidance, anyone could do it really. It's like all these things, it looks a lot more complicated than it is if you actually get beyond the surface. So yeah, I'm very much an evangelist for sort of people not being put off by the technical side of these, and thinking that it doesn't take much for people to be given the tools to do it really. And I think everyone could enjoy the power of the, it's a real nice sensation of that sort of freedom and power once you start getting under the hood like that, and you can you can do almost anything, but it's just about it's also almost more about thinking up the ideas of what to do and then putting it into action is the slightly easier, if more long-winded part of it. But yeah, very happy to help anyone who does want assistance in that area.
Oh yeah, I learned Python at uni, but that was 10 years ago, so I don't really remember it. But this has definitely inspired me to go and have a bit of a look and poke around and see whether I remember enough. So we've got a question from Chris. How long did it take you to set up the Espionage Bot, and also what is your background with respect to software development?
Yeah, up until I joined, well, to be honest, even the DDAT scheme is more about a sort of management training scheme that's just happens to be sort of digital and tech orientated than an actual technical scheme. So it's really all from my own personal interest that I've learned how to program really. I don't have like a professional background in it as such, but I have always liked programming since I was a kid and messing around with BASIC and stuff. And then a few years ago, I did decide I'm going to learn Python, and I started with Java, and then I realized that was quite painful, and then I decided to go into Python because it was a lot less annoying, basically. But yeah, just all self-taught really. But I have always loved the sort of problem-solving aspect of these kind of things, and the logical sort of work. I mean, when it doesn't work and you can't work out why, it's horrible, but there's always a reason why it doesn't work. That's the beauty of it, I guess. You just got to find it. It's you that's told it to do something wrong, not the program, basically.
That is ringing an awful lot of bells, the not being able to find out why it doesn't work. So how long did it take you to set up the bot, sort of roughly?
Oh, sorry, yeah. I forgot that aspect of the question. I mean, essentially I had to remind myself how to use Python. I had to work out what I wanted, what logically the bot needed to do, which probably wasn't that complicated really. Do a fair bit of searching online about the Discord library and how that worked, and almost you could piece together some existing things that people had done online that kind of did elements of what you needed in that flow chart, of sort of logical flow chart. So piece it together from that. I'd say it kind of took me a few days really, just mainly in the evenings. I'm lucky enough that my work, the fast stream scheme gives me some leeway to spend a bit of work time as well, kind of doing stuff that's to do with the networks and so on, and sort of self-directed learning. But yeah, I guess it probably took me like Monday to Friday of a week to kind of get it from coming up with the idea to sort of getting it working, at least in a way that mostly worked. And then probably a bit of debugging to get it working 100% how you want it. So yeah, about that sort of time scale, I'd say, and for like a few hours a day. Probably about 12, 15 hours of work or something.
Okay, not too long considering the sort of like scope of what it was possible to do. So in that game, did players know that their comms could be spied upon before the game began? Perhaps because did everyone have access to the espionage tool and therefore know it's a possibility, or were there some people who were completely in the dark about it?
No, everyone knew about it and had their own particular level of capability on that front. But it would be interesting to run ones where, yeah, I mean, we were thinking it'd be nice to really lean into the whole espionage side and do a game that's really focused on that, because it was a bit of a sideshow for this game, but yeah, really keen to sort of make a really espionage focused one. But you could certainly have ones where people weren't aware that they were likely to be spied on. And we actually ran a counter-terrorism themed game on Friday, the sort of first version of that, and there was a feature where we had decided to throw in a bit of a curveball where one of the players was a kind of spy, but the other team weren't aware of that, and then we sort of let them know a couple of turns in and stuff. So yeah, I mean, in terms of drama and sort of intrigue, you can't really beat that kind of thing, can you? You know, it's sort of everyone loves a bit of that kind of intrigue. So I think there's definitely a lot of room for coming up with some further ideas that really make the most of those sort of things.
Absolutely. We are just coming up to 9 o'clock, but we do have still a few more questions. Are you okay to hang on and answer a few more?
Yeah, I'm happy to go on as long as you are, really, yeah.
Cool. For anyone who does have to rush off at 9, as Chris has said in the chat a couple of times, we will be recording this and making it available afterwards. So if you want to know the answers to any of the questions that are still here but have to dash off, you will get an opportunity, don't worry. Chris has also asked, what are your ideas for using Discord bots or other tech in in-person games? You briefly alluded to that during your talk.
Yes, I mean, to be honest with you, my allusion to it was more of a sort of big question mark, as in what could we do, than that I had already managed to come up with many answers to that question, to be very honest. But I'm all ears for any thoughts on that, really. I'm just keen to try and take what we've learned over the last 18 plus months and use that for the next chapter, really. I mean, I'm guessing you could just add extra. What bots are good for, I suppose, is just very rapid information processing and potentially spitting out new sort of results. So I guess anywhere where information goes in and you want a rapid answer, but maybe you could do something more interesting than a human could do in that time, in terms of sort of bringing possibly sort of machine learning algorithms into games and things like that. But as to what that would look like and what benefit it would bring, they're still very much open questions in my view, but ones that I'd like to explore.
Yeah, I really like the idea of using tech at Megagames. I did have a bit of tech at Trope High in terms of getting people's like grades and converting that into college acceptances, but it didn't quite pan out as well on the day, probably because I'm made mistakes in it somewhere. But yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I think especially since Kurt mentioned it as well, hopefully there'll be some fantastic conversations about ideas for in-person tech in the Designers Lounge or somewhere like that afterwards. Can you let us know what, if you can, what the next Civil Service War Game Network game is going to be? I know you mentioned a counter-terrorism one. Is that still in progress? Have you got more ideas for future ones?
We would like to run a second version of the counter-terrorism one, because it was, with all of these games, it's almost like the first run through is giving you the sort of outer boundaries of what the game could do, because certainly in this case it was very free running and didn't have much in the way of mechanics, but it was more of a sort of real thought experiment, and it gave us all some really good ideas of actually some more mechanical elements you could put in to sort of direct it a bit. So we probably will try and run something like that again. There's also talk of something based around a sort of Central Asian scenario that is less military focused and more about sort of climate change agreements and sort of resource agreements, which interests me, to be honest. I am really interested in the military defense kind of side of things, but I'm definitely also really keen to see how war games can examine slightly wider sort of scenarios that maybe do look at resource conflicts and sort of, well, hope, possibly also games that try and get people to come to agreements and work together, as well as maybe a sort of aim as well, and like the environmental and sort of sustainability kind of spheres that are going to be very important in the future. So yeah, I guess personally I'm really interested in sort of alternative games maybe that can look at stuff that's slightly less obviously war game orientated.
Oh, on that note, Rob's asked a question. When you mention in-person events, what kind are you looking at? It would be great to see you at a recreational mega game, but also some of this stuff might be useful for exercises at work, e.g. flood exercises coming up next year. So have you got any thoughts about sort of in-person events that you might be thinking about?
I mean, all of these events we'd like to try and run similar ones in person, I guess. Yeah, certainly in terms of my own design ideas, that's the side of things that I'd like to look at, but I haven't really got round to that. So far, my focus has been on enabling other people's designs, really, but I certainly would like to come up with some event ideas of my own, or at least probably with other input as well. Yeah, it'd be interesting to try and repurpose some of the games we've run in person, because I joined at a time when it was all virtual. So for me, that side of it is very much unknown territory, to be honest. But I'm really keen to do that side, and I'd like to design like an in-person war game, not just the technical elements, but also the side of it that doesn't need to be technical as well, because we all have to sit in front of screens all the time. So I am also really liking the idea of something that takes you away from that a bit. So yeah, I'd love to say I had an amazing idea for an in-person event, but I'm really keen to see other people's first, to be honest. But yeah, keen to do some in-person events anyway.
Brilliant. And I personally think it's really exciting that we've got people who've sort of like joined the hobby, encountered the hobby since we've moved online. The fact that the hobbies continue to grow, the fact that people have come in whose main experiences would be the virtual side of it, and the sort of new ideas that they'll be able to bring. I think we're going to wrap up the questions there. So huge thank you, Joe, for sharing all of your Discord bots and all of your ideas. As I said, I think I definitely have got a few more ideas for potential tech elements of games as a result of it. So thank you. A big thank you again to Kurt for helping as well, and a huge thank you to everyone who has taken some time out of their Sunday to tune in. And thanks for all of your great questions. I'm just going to share a few exciting announcements that we have on the MegaCon front. So firstly, I'd like to announce our next MegaCon Mini event. Get your diaries ready, which is going to be on Sunday, the 19th of September, on the topic of player experience. So that's about 2 months from now. We've got two brilliant speakers lined up. The first is Claire Evans, who's Player Experience Community Manager for Empire LARP, who will be sharing how the LARP hobby, which I know there's been some discussion about in the pub this evening, ensures a top-notch experience for all of the players at their events, and how we in megagaming community can apply some of those techniques in our own games. And our second talk is going to be by Matty Robinson, who will be discussing her experience as a new player liaison and how she believes the role is really essential for developing the next waves of avid megagamers. So that's going to be the Sunday, the 19th of September. Get it in your diary now. We also have a bunch more exciting talks planned for later in the year. We're planning from September onwards to be running a MegaCon Mini on a monthly basis rather than bi-monthly. And we've got lots of awesome stuff planned, which we'll announce a little closer to the time. But our second exciting announcement is that we have started planning MegaCon 2022, the big full-size con. And we're now accepting submissions for the event, whether that's Megagames, playtests, seminars, workshops, or anything you'd like to run. And that's going to be the Friday the 4th to Sunday the 6th of February 2022. And I'm just going to find the link to share if you would like to submit anything for MegaCon 2022, we're open to anything. We haven't got anything on the agenda yet, so please fill it out, send us over all your mega games, all your seminar ideas, anything that you'd like to run. That's it. So thank you everyone for joining us. A huge thank you again for both Kurt and Joe. Could we get another virtual round of applause in the comments for them? I think we'll just unmute everyone now if people want to stick around for a bit of a chat. Thanks very much.